Our amazing story begins with how a player was able to upgrade after a few years to his first level. But while fighting against a huge spirit wolf, he realized that he couldn't do damage to such a powerful demonic beast, and all he could do was survive by cleaning up the trash left behind by the players. And our hero has level 0, which only counts for those who are always in everyone's way and always dragging the team down. But most players think he's a useless person who can never do anything. But the hero tried to survive at all costs, even when fighting monsters that are several times stronger than him. And you could tell he was living like a piece of garbage. But still our hero realized that he could not lower his hands, because he needs to protect his family and friends. And he decided once and for all that he would never die as an outcast. And when he was finally able to deal a critical strike to his spirit wolf opponent, the notification system showed that he was only able to deal 1 point of damage. We'll now join you back to when things were just getting started and our hero was entering the A-rank gate. And going inside, he realized that he had underestimated his strength, for there were terrifying monsters there. But also, dear viewers, you should know that our hero's name is Ye Qing. He is a senior no-talent garbage man. At a time when strong players were fighting incredibly powerful monsters, they saw that Ye Qing was only tangling under their feet, and they would shout at him that he was too slow. Ye Qing's job was to recycle and sort the trash left from the shift workers after fighting monsters every day. All because the Abyss Overlords don't allow these resources to dry into the society of ordinary people. And after all, this rank crystal with one such crystal is worth more than 50,000 yuan. But at the same time, one of the players approached him and started talking that they would calculate the rewards for this dungeon one by one if they secretly hid the crystals. Not only would they be fined a large amount of money, they would also be banned from the dungeon. But Ye Qing slowly started to raise his head and replied to the player not to worry. After all, he had been doing this job for many years and knew all the rules. After all, if the forward battle group did not carefully mop up the monsters, the lives of the level 0 players who were in the rear could be jeopardized at any moment. But also our hero realized that it would not be an exaggeration to say that this job was worth it. Also, the base salary for returning from the dungeon is 300 yuan. Each scavenger can get 1,000 of the value of the garbage collected, which is about 600 yuan. After deducting the agency fee of 30%, 6 earnings is 540 yuan. But also our hero is still 7,000 yuan away from paying off the debt. And one day, one of the collectors came to our hero and said that he had one good job, but his commission was 3,000 yuan, and if he agreed, he could proceed to work. But our hero was surprised that the commission price was too high. At that moment, the guy said that if he needed money, and if he wanted to go, he should pack immediately and join the rest of the group. To Ye Qing, he replied that he would pack his things right away. A little later, they were already heading together on a shared bus to a public shopping center in Shenzhen City. The guys who were inside started discussing, aren't they going to a copy of the Abyss that was just being talked about on the news, and they say it's an A-rank Abyss. And no wonder there's such a high reward for mopping it up. But also, a lot of groups couldn't get out of there alive. But they also have another important mission besides cleaning up, to bring back the gear of destroyed teams. But the other pickers didn't like this idea. After all, they thought that these capitalists were really ruthless in sending them there. Ye Qing, who was sitting behind, thought about the guy's words about the capitalists who have commercial oversight over the Abyss. After all, there was a huge disaster 10 years ago, and many gates of the Abyss descended from the void. And a new threat has appeared before the humans. These are creatures from the Abyss. And at that time, there were players who started fighting against those monsters. After all, they had the ability to damage creatures and destroy them one by one. And once they destroyed the monsters, they discovered that the Abyss had more than just energy products, such as magic crystals. After all, there were also various mysterious weapons and props in the Abysses. But there was also something else in the Abyss, this incredible equipment that only hunters and large guilds could pick up. And as soon as humanity discovered a new continent for the second time, it began a rapid exploration of the Abyss. But also a large number of traditional businesses collapsed, and social funds were used to support a new market that dealt with the Abyss. And at that moment, one of the men told our hero to excuse him, for they were not accepting level 0 members into their firm. But also Ye Qing heard from the doctor that the hospital was not a charity organization, and if he couldn't pay soon, he should take his little sister and leave. But still, Ye Qing kept asking the doctors to give him a few more days. But afterward, Ye Qing, who was returning home, met the landlord, who immediately started yelling at him to return his rent money for the past 2 months. And after all that, he couldn't stand the fact that everyone called him trash, and chased him out of his job at home, and also for him to take his sick sister out of the hospital since he can't pay her bills. At the time, there was a tough employment situation for level 0 players who couldn't successfully change jobs. And even then, these players were basically useless in society. And since there was no other choice, Ye Qing decided to take out a small loan that was given out at the very second. And at the time when our hero was sitting on a bench and crying because he had no money, a man came up to him and offered his help. And he had no choice to say no. So he had to go so drastic and take that quick loan. But now, presently, our hero sighed, for he remembered all those moments I had gone through. At the same moment, one of the guys turned around to Ye Qing and started saying that he had borrowed millions from creditors and lost everything trading in the stock market. If he couldn't pay back the money, he would sell everything he had. He also turned to Ye Qing and said that he heard that he has a younger sister who is counting on him and his support, and he needs to work hard to pay the medical bills, which are already very expensive. And such a man might as well die with the amount he has on him now. He can live like garbage for the rest of his life. But once they got to their destination and met one of the players, who immediately started yelling at them for being too slow, and they must not fall behind them, for they will not take responsibility if they perish. And they should hurry up now and approach everyone else so they can finally enter the gate already. Ye Qing, who was walking last, pondered at this time. He needs to work to earn money and get back alive to his sister to pay her medical bills. Once inside, he found himself in the underground city of Vrang's public market. Stepping inside through the portal, Ye Qing began to twirl his head in different directions, for this was the first time he was in the abyss. But at this point, the players began to draw their weapons, for they sensed someone approaching them. And turning their heads, they saw that on the other side, huge wolves were running towards them at great speed. The squad leader couldn't understand why the monsters appeared as soon as they stepped inside. But another player started to come forward, for he realized that this was just a pack of first-rate spirit wolves. And just as they were ready to pounce on him, he began to use his fire magic and attacked them, causing a huge fireball to fly at the monsters. But after the explosion the player used, all the wolves started scattering in different directions. Eventually noticed that it was just a pack of cowardly wolves who had underestimated their strength. But the captain continued to shout to everyone else to keep their guard up, for demonic beasts could attack them from behind the gardens in any dark corner. But at that moment, another player started asking the captain where they were going now. But the captain raised his sword up and said that they needed to go to the 5th floor. But the girl standing near him started to address him, that she didn't know if it was an illusion or not. But it seemed to her that the size of the 1st floor of the market had increased by more than 5 times, and the height by more than 3 times. But the player with glasses said that it was just a copy based on the real world, but its internal structure was completely mutated. But by the way, he didn't understand why the group that had been sent here hadn't left any traces. But turning back to the guys, he said the scavengers had better put on bodies instead of just following them. But at this point, one of the players started tying their shoelaces and said that no matter where level 0 scavengers go, their only use is to be trash. But at the same time, Ye Qing was walking behind him and didn't notice this guy, causing him to trip over him, and he fell to the ground. But the guy started to get up and yelled at him to watch where he was going. But as soon as he approached him and took hold of his clothes with his hands, Ye Qing frightenedly began to apologize. But the guy started taking it up in the air and saying that bumping into trash made him cringe, because he originally thought he was being attacked by a monster. But the commander suddenly began to turn around and tell his partner not to worry. They already had a mission in these scavengers. But that guy kept getting angry and glaring at our hero, calling him a stinking scavenger, and throwing him to the ground. He also said that if he didn't know he was trash, he should stay away from him. But Ye Qing started to raise his head and look at that guy, realizing that he was just a jerk looking down on others. But while Ye Qing came to his senses and picked up his clothes, that guy continued to resent. That is this really what they call a professional team. After all, they are just a burden on society and useless people who don't know how to do anything. And all they can do is just pick up trash and get in the way of the professionals. After all, these are collective terms that society uses for 0-level members. And our hero understood that they didn't know what it was like to be like that. When his experience is 99 out of 100, and he advances to the next level as soon as he can gain the full 100 experience. At this moment, Ye Qing, who was walking last, started to turn around because he felt that a demonic beast was following him. And while the other scavengers started to run away, he wondered what he should do. But after looking at the monster, our hero realized that he was the one left on the front lines. And the fact that this monster has very little health left, and it turns out that now is his chance, and decided he didn't need to waste much time. He started looking around, peering out to see if there were any weapons nearby. But in the end, he saw a wooden shield and a small stick that were level 1. Why did the wolf end up here? Ask in A. Because he had critical health and had to leave his group, and that's why he's now running at Yeqing. Because with the health he has, he can only attack 0 players. Our hero realized that this demonic monster was exactly the opportunity he had been waiting for. Jumping aside, he realized that he had to act right now, or he wouldn't get another chance like this. And as soon as he jumped up, he started flying at full speed at the demonic wolf, because now he knew he could take him down in one blow. And as soon as he reached him, started swinging his wooden stick and hitting him on the head, Yeqing hoped that would be enough. But as he looked up, he saw that it proved to be little, for he had done 0 damage, and his opponent, the spirit wolf, remained in the same spot, but slowly began to turn his head towards the hero. But also behind him were other scavengers who were watching the battle and started shouting to our hero that, are they really such fools? After all, that monster had been on that field for not a day or two, and doesn't he know that only those who change jobs can deal damage to demonic monsters? Well, of course, Yeqing knew this and began to continue attacking the demonic wolf. Even though he understood that with such weak characteristics, he couldn't break through the defenses of even the weakest monsters. And turning around, he began to run far away to find another way to destroy the wolf. But also, more than anyone else, he realized that he was in a very bad situation right now. But still, he had no choice but to give fight. After all, he realizes this fact that he will not have this opportunity again. And as soon as he got to the wall, he started bouncing and pushing off of it. And once he was behind the demonic wolf, he began to attack it again, realizing that he needed to use a lot more of his power that he now had. At the same time, the other player who had destroyed most of the demonic wolves started laughing, because he realized that once the level 0 members saw a demonic beast in a critical state, they wouldn't be so scared that their legs would shake. The captain, raising the magic crystal, said that they couldn't earn a fortune just by destroying a few monsters, but unless they encounter a demonic beast, there's nothing they can do. And no wonder they think they are insignificant scum, and keep the most expensive things and give the rest to the garbage men to clean up after them. But suddenly the guys started looking at each other strangely, and one of the players told the boss that she thought there was another beast slipping away. And while on the second floor, the guys were screaming that it was a demonic monster and it was coming straight for them. Then one of the players started telling his boss that that purple piece of clothing he would already take for himself, and no one should take it. At this time, the battle continued on the second floor, where our hero fought not for life, but for death. But as soon as he hit the demonic wolf a few times, it pounced on him and started biting his arm in response. Because of which, Yeqing began to feel immense pain in his body, realizing that he might die right now. Still, gathering all his strength, he began to swing and shout that he would not allow himself to die like trash. And with all his might, he dealt critical damage to the demonic wolf. And once the notification system showed him that a critical hit had destroyed the wolf, Yeqing began to get out from under him little by little. And in the end, he saw that he was able to finally take down this ferocious wolf and get out alive because of this battle. But still he rejoiced in the fact that he had been able to destroy it, even though he was badly wounded. But with a mouthful of air, he suddenly rose to his feet and started screaming very loudly, most likely because of the adrenaline I had never experienced before in my life. But at that moment, he began to turn his head, for he saw another player approaching him. And this was the same guy who had been harassing him recently. And he started smiling and telling Yeqing that a lowly guy like him had managed to destroy one low-level wolf. And coming closer to him, he took hold of his clothes and began to ask if he was acting like a hero, if he thought he was living too long. After all, they spent the money so he would get his share of the money for taking out the trash. And the fact that the career path of a job changer is not limited to one path. And when his experience reaches level 1, even a level 0 participant can successfully change jobs and even more easily get a hidden job. And to achieve that goal, they need to figure out how to gain experience to level up. But for a level 0 member, unable to deal damage with a demonic beast to do so is more difficult than ascending to heaven. And after spending so many years slicing and dicing his life, he was looking for a guaranteed critical hit, a way to inflict at least 1 point of damage. And with each day that he participated in the raids, his experience accumulated. And once he was able to destroy that wolf, was able to get his first level. And it's the only way for him to earn experience points. And once the conditions were met, the notification system started showing that he could accept another job. And while he was rejoicing, the notification system once again showed him that he had gained his first level. And the conditions for full fulfillment were met. That player who was standing beside him began to open his mouth wide in astonishment, for he couldn't understand how a little rascal like him managed to find a job. But at that moment, the magical energy began to that very moment. But as soon as he looked up, he saw his new job, which made him a little upset. But the guy who was watching all this started to change his expression. And trying not to laugh, he held back as best he could. But eventually he couldn't take it anymore and started laughing out loud, telling our hero that a garbage man always remains a garbage man, even after changing jobs. And as he got closer to him, he started to keep laughing and saying that he couldn't contain his laughter because this is a precious once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. And he changed his job to the same one that literally means garbage. And also that guy started telling our hero to listen to him carefully, and the fact that he is a first-level scavenger, his friends are already gone, and the mission to restore order will be accomplished by them. But suddenly turning around, that player started walking away and yelling to his brothers that he had to tell them something incredible that had just happened. But our hero lowered his head and began to look at his arm and realized he was still weak. As he walked up, he realized that if a scavenger's maximum level was level 1, he couldn't use level-up attributes to grow. But still he couldn't figure out what Scavenger's ability was. As he looked closer at him, he noticed something strange that surprised him greatly. It was that he looked at the destroyed monster, and the notification system showed him that a recyclable trash was found, a low-level wolf spirit. When he read it to the end, he was very much surprised, for he did not realize what it could mean. But having responded to the suggestion that he agreed, the notification system started processing the data. And immediately something strange began to appear behind his back as a multitude of hands began to grasp the wolf. And our hero couldn't realize if this was his true job, and the fact that this is the ability of a supreme scavenger. After all, he looked to see that the action was the same when he was personally working. And now some force was pulling the wolf into the unknown darkness. And once the multitude of hands pulled him inside, he realized it was a little frightening. But as he looked at the subsequent notification windows, another window appeared in front of him, saying that data processing was now taking place. Well, once the disintegration was complete, Ye Qing saw 2 hands show up, who handed him a special card that said he had obtained the spirit of a wolf and currently had 3 attribute points, and he could receive cards and personal attribute points from the monsters he destroyed. But our hero couldn't believe what he had just seen and began to open his window of attributes. But he also pointed out that he only needed 3 experience points to use it, at which point he made the decision that he would put all his points into agility. Next, the notification system began to show that he had met the conditions for using the spirit wolf and currently had 4 points and required more than 3 points of agility. And also the notification system asked the player, is he ready to use it? To which he replied to let the system use it. And after that, our hero began to receive all spiritual energy, which in an instant began to distribute throughout his body. But he didn't fully feel all the power that had been bestowed upon him. And as soon as everything was successful, he dropped his hands and couldn't realize if that was it. I mean, there were no results. But at that moment, one of the players shouted at him to run up to him and clean up immediately. And just as he prepared to run without realizing it, he pressed his foot on the ground, so it started to buckle. And he doesn't realize what's going on, started running at breakneck speed. But here an obstacle awaited him, over which he tripped and began to fly headlong into the ground. Hitting the 2nd floor with its entire mass, a scream of pain rang out. Once on the ground, he started looking at the notification window and realized that this was the same skill he had recently learned. But now he understood why that was so, for his skill was in a state of procrastination. And as soon as he got to his feet, he began to sigh deeply. And turning his head, he saw something strange at his back. And the strange thing was that there were huge amounts of slain monsters lying in front of him. And at this moment, he remembered that the notification system had shown him that he could not only gain attributes, but also recycle beast power, which was the only ability of a homeless scavenger. And as soon as he activated his skill, a multitude of hands first appeared behind his back and dragged the monsters into the darkness. After that, the notification system started showing him that he received 4 points from attributes. After that, he also received 3 points from attributes. And as soon as he got his last 2 attribute points, this notification system showed that there was data collection going on. Ye Qing also realized that when he first touched a slain spirit wolf, he had an ability. After that, eating slain monsters of one and the same no longer gave new abilities. Moreover, the reward for eating one and the same would gradually decrease. Well, his new skill started to show him that there was still a benefit to absorption after recycling new monsters killed for a one-time reward, and he got his new attribute. And upon opening the notification window, he saw that his attribute points had accumulated to 111 points. But still, he couldn't figure out which attribute he should increase, and it looked like there would be no shortage of attribute points in the future. And at that moment, a smile appeared on his face, for he realized that it was very simple. After all, he just needs to distribute everything evenly. And once he was able to do that, the notification system showed that his strength had increased and his dexterity had decreased. At this time, the other hunters continued the battle against the remaining two monsters. And once they were done destroying, one of the guys told his commander that one of the scavengers had changed his job to scavenger, and it was a hidden job that he had never seen on the change chart of a great job. But the guy with the glasses started explaining that every year hidden jobs are recorded in the great job change chart, but the ranking of the most valuable occupations and almost never changes. Most of the so-called hidden jobs are just a laugh. But another player added that given that his highest level is only 1, he maxes out A rank slightly stronger than someone with level 0, and really almost nothing has changed. But in the end, the guys decided they weren't going to pay attention to it and decided to move on. The commander, who was in the front rows, started pulling out his sword and shield, telling the guys to keep their guard up. And as soon as everyone said they would be ready for any attack, they began to move deeper into the dungeon. But eventually they reached some strange place where they saw huge black branches in front of them. But there was also something that surprised the players. After all, they certainly didn't expect to see such a thing here. And it's some weird monster that was embedded in a tree. But the captain began to explain that the mission objective had been found, and it was the remains of a past hunting party. But the huntress girl standing beside him began to ask, "How can there be a mound in this mall, especially on the 5th floor?" But one of the guys came up to that tree and said that here the depth of transformation had not exceeded only 48 hours, but the bodies had already been dried out to the point where they had lost their essence through some kind of magic. The girl also added that they had only encountered a few zombified wolves on the way here, and the falcon hunting group was ranked, and it wasn't strange that they had all died here. But the captain meanwhile began to turn his head slowly, for he saw that something was appearing behind them, and the ones that appeared there were some strange creatures that began to emerge from the dark depths of the corridor. But as soon as he lowered his head, he saw that one of the monsters was already holding him anew. And then he remembered what was on the news, that the People's Mall in the city had been transformed into an abyss and initially assessed as a level B mutation. The number of missing people had now reached 217, and after the flashback, he started yelling to his group to quickly start backing up. And following that, he shouted that it was a monster ambush and they had been tricked. After all, they all wondered why they hadn't found their bodies, and it turned out that they had all gathered here and turned into a mountain of monsters. But as soon as they began to fight them off, the captain shouted that the demonic creature in the way was only bait to lure the prey deeper. But at that moment, a huge tree at their backs began to awaken, and the captain, turning around, realized it was the true master of this abyss, in which is a high-level plant eater of the abyss, and he is pretty much A rank. And realizing the fact that they had fallen into a trap, not knowing how to proceed, the captain began to look for ways to escape. But his comrade, who was standing near him, began to tell him to look up. Because right now, right over their heads, the entire group of hunters that had recently died here had begun to come to life and attack them. At this time, our hero, who was nearby, was mining the last crystals from the fallen monsters. But as soon as he raised his head, he saw an achievement in the notification window that he had commandeered an obstacle stone in a city place. And immediately, a portal appeared in front of him, and the notification window below informed him that he would be receiving the next reward, which to him was a very interesting proposition. And at the same moment, the notification window showed him that he had received a heart necklace of extraordinary quality and of the lowest grade. The object was a sword, and Ye Qing realized that he needed a first level, even for the achievement award, in this trash-quality profession. But at the same moment, he began to hear some strange sounds nearby. And turning his head around, he couldn't understand what was going on there and where such horrifying sounds were coming from. But by now he fully saw some strange monster start running straight at him, because of which Ye Qing was scared out of his wits and began to retreat backwards little by little. But as soon as the monster hit the ground near him, he bounced to the side. And after that, he started doing backflips, as if his body was moving on its own. As he stopped, he realized that this gave him a great fright, for a second he felt that his end was near. But looking at his hands, he realized that his body had become more agile, and it was because he had added points of agility and strength. But as he clenched his fist, he realized that he had indeed become stronger. But the monster was already beside him, and being on his right, he began to swing his huge paw. And as soon as his hand was near Ye Qing's face, Ye Qing realized that he had to act differently, or else he would be destroyed. And jumping aside, the monster missed and hit the door that was nearby with its claw, causing it to bend in different directions. But Ye Qing once again jumped aside to break the distance and think of tactics to fight this monster. But as he stood nearby, he began to pay attention to his feet and realized that not only had his agility increased, but his strength itself was not the same as before. And realizing that he needed to move, he began to activate his wolf spirit skill and redirect all the power into his legs. Shifting from his seat, he began to fly at the monster, clenching his fist. He realized that it was his turn to attack, and now he was changing jobs, and this time he would be able to defend himself. And as soon as he got close to it, he hit the monster with all his might, causing it to start flying off to the side. But at the same moment, a notification window appeared and began to show the hero that a force check challenge had been made, and he was putting a breakthrough effect on the target, and his defense and physical damage were being increased by 100%. Smiling, Ye Qing realized that this was a new version of him, and he would now improve beyond recognition. On the notification window, it also showed that with his 20 intelligence points would increase significantly and allow him to detect hidden traps and targets in monsters. Looking at the monster, he saw that the notification system was showing him that it was a parasitized human, and its weakness was fire. But suddenly the monster started opening its mouth wider and making some incomprehensible sounds. And following this, he began to move towards our hero, who also decided that he should not stand still. But as soon as the monster swung, Ye Qing decided to duck down so that he wouldn't get caught by it. Otherwise, if he hit it with one punch, he could finish it off. And with the help of his agility power, he began to do a backflip and thus passed through the monster's blind spots. And finding himself at his back, he decided that this was his chance with which to destroy him. But first he needs to find his weak spot and use his weapon to make a strike. And as soon as he thought of the weapon, it immediately began to appear in his hand. And without thinking long, he jumped straight to the monster's back and began to perform a few punches. At that moment, the monster stopped moving and started standing like a duck in the same place. But raising his head at the Quicksilver, he saw that he had hit right at a vulnerable spot. And as soon as the monster hit the ground, the notification system showed him that he had destroyed the parasitic human. But he was also exposed to whatever liquid had gotten on his arm, causing the notification system to show that poison resistance was now occurring. And at the same moment, all the poisons that were on his arm began to disappear. Ye Qing, clutching his sword, realized that this was a success, and it was the first time he had killed some monster by himself. But following this, the notification system showed that he could dispose of the parasitized person. And once he agreed, the notification system also showed that the disposal was successful. And he was able to acquire a passive skill. His poisoning effects would be reversed and randomly transformed into beneficial effects. But he also couldn't figure out if the effect of toxic evolution meant that he could drink tainted potions as if they were tonics. But the notification system began to show that his passive skill, toxic evolution, had been added, and he received 5 distributable points. And he also got a potion that is highly toxic, but it shouldn't be consumed. And with the help of toxic evolution, a strong poison will turn into a beneficial effect. And once he opened the potion and started using it because he wanted to see what would come of it. But as soon as he drank it, the notification system showed that the critical effect was transformed into a curative effect due to toxic evolution, and the resulting damage was repaid by the treatment. The system also showed that the necessary buff had been applied, its base attribute value had been doubled, the effect would last for 1 minute, and the randomly generated effect was so strong that our hero began to feel a huge surge of strength. But as soon as he opened the notification window, he realized that after raising the intelligence to a certain value, he could see more hidden information about the target. So this time, he would distribute those 5 attribute points to intelligence. And while he was distributing points, a few monsters appeared behind his back again. Turning around, he realized he had missed the monster again. But this time it was different, for he saw that there were a lot of them, more than 10 pieces for sure. But at the same moment, he began to remember the words he had been told very often, that he was a burden to society and also trash. Useless man, they always called him by that name. But now he can proudly say that he is no longer such a dregs of society. After all, he is now a first-class garbage man with his new job. And if they get in the way, he'll have to take them all out to get their power and their skills. At the same time, elsewhere, a group of hunters fought against a falcon hunting group that had been parasitized. And they all couldn't figure out what to do because there were so many monsters. They fought not as ordinary monsters but as hunters, but already with different intentions, as hunters. The captain who fought them realized that even if they were just monsters, they were stronger than when they were alive. And not to mention the boss himself, who is now nearby watching the battle. But this did not last long, for in an instant the boss began to move, and stepping in a few steps, he began to harass the hunters. They tried to escape, but not all of them managed to escape, for some hunters who were behind began to be attacked by monsters. And some hunters could no longer move, for they were completely absorbed by the dark magics of the dungeon boss. The squad leader, running away, started yelling to his partners to keep a close eye on the boss. But his comrades could no longer hear his orders, for they were trying to escape at all costs. The commander, meanwhile, was trying to fight off those pursuing him. But one of the guys who had managed to run farther away shrieked to his commanding officer that he had come here for money and equipment, and it would be damn foolish for him to die here. But the commander didn't stop fighting back and began to notice that his body was being controlled by someone else. But as soon as he turned his head, he asked his comrade why he was doing this, since he was part of his team. But the one using his magic to subdue the commander told him to excuse him, because he needed him to slow down the monsters first. And while the commander was the bait for the monsters, that guy decided he could get out of this place quickly and save his own skin. But as soon as that guy ran a few meters away, the commander realized that he was about to be finished, and the last thing he cried out to his comrade was that he was a traitor. But the one thing that guy realized was that if he could escape now, at least he still had the gear he picked up, and at the very least he'd have to make excuses for the team's defeat. But suddenly he turned his head and crashed into our hero, who was already standing over him. But as he looked up, he saw in front of him also the guy he had recently bullied, and the same trashman started asking him if he really betrayed his teammates to survive. The guy tried not to pay attention to him, for he could see that there were many destroyed monsters behind him. Rising up, he began to ask Ye Qing if he really had his hands full in this matter, and also realized he couldn't let him leave the place. If he told the oversight committee, he'd be finished. At this point, he started asking the heroes if he wanted to get stronger, and now was the time to go and feed himself to the monsters. Then he hit the hero with a burrow in the chest. But at that moment, the notification system showed that a durability check had been triggered, and his strikes on the target were invalid, which would cause him to suffer unpleasant consequences. This caused him to suddenly feel pain in his leg, and he fell to the ground, screaming that he was stinking trash and why something was happening to him now. But Ye Qing only said one thing, that he was not worthy of being a hunter. After all, he was just trash. "I've activated my skill," Ye Qing said, starting to use his hands to pull him inside his portal. And at the same moment he was swept up, by his feet began to be pulled into another space, and he could only scream. And at that moment, the notification system showed the hero that garbage sorting was about to take place. But suddenly the hands that emerged from the portal showed that the trash he had gotten was impossible to recycle. And that hunter was thrown back out, which made our hero realize that not all garbage can be recycled. But he also pointed out a system notification that said, improved recycling ability and useless target abilities could be recycled with content. Ye Qing said that if the target can't be reworked, he agrees by default, and it's very convenient. And following that, our hero started using a 3-minute experience card. But the monsters that were nearby began to surround him from all sides, and he turned his head and saw this and began to realize that this was not all to the good, and he needed to act. Putting out his hand, he thought about how to use the fireball skill. He remembered, after all, watching the guy who did it first. And after that, you just need to extend your arm. And as soon as he did that, a huge explosion covered the entire area where the monsters were. And now we see a bright light on the second floor because of that explosion. After lowering his hand, Ye Qing realized that he had overdone it a bit, but it still worked very well. But noticing the fact that he made a mistake, because he hadn't had time to recycle that garbage yet, and it just turned into smoke. At that moment, another creature that used to be a hunter appeared behind his back, and with weapon in hand, headed straight for the hero who was standing on the ground. But somehow Ye Qing noticed him and started to retreat to the side. But as he turned around, he saw that the monster had armed himself with blades, and he now needed to proceed with caution. But before he could think of a strategy, the monster was already beside him and continued to strike with his weapon. But Ye Qing, without wasting any time, began to summon his blade, which appeared in his hand at the same moment. And they swung around and began to attack each other, striking with their swords. At the same time, Ye Qing realized that he had yet to learn the melee skill, but immediately he turned his attention to the commander who was lying nearby, and with his skill, he began to absorb him. But looking at the commander, He couldn't understand why he didn't want to be resurrected by this thing after his death. But it was too late, because his skill had completely absorbed it. And following that, the notification window showed the hero that he had gotten the Golden Shield skill. Immediately, he began to summon a golden shield in his hand and use it against his enemy. And gathering all the strength in his palms, he began to swing his golden seat. And accelerating to full speed, he destroyed the monster in front of him with a single blow. Slowly turning around, Ye Qing walked towards him. And displaying his hand, he began to apply the skill, for he needed to recycle this monster. And once the monster was recycled, the notification system showed that it had received the Dagger Mastery card, and it could wield it as an assassin and deliver a barrage of stabbing attacks. After realizing the entire point, Ye Qing realized that the dagger would now be more flexible in his hands.